Okay. It's a pleasure to have everyone here this morning. We're very blessed in so many ways. And as we begin, Denise will lead us in prayer.
Join in prayer, please. Gracious God, we just thank you for this time together. And we thank you for all those who are gathered in person and those who are online. It is, you have said that when we seek you with our whole heart, you will allow us to see you. And so with that, we open our hearts to receive what would be revealed by Bob today. And know that you are present and just ask you to bless this time that we have together. All these things we ask in Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. If all of you at home would be sure that you know that you are muted, I'm about to mute you myself, but I do want to introduce our speaker, and we'll get into that as he speaks. We're so blessed today to have Bob Deans join us during a pivotal, really kind of scary time in our country. And to have someone who not only has followed politics as part of his profession, the White House correspondent for Cox Newspapers, president of the White House Correspondent, or what was that title? Director of the White House Correspondents Association, and then as later on, and now currently director of strategic engagement for the Natural Resources Defense Council. Bob is part of our family, but has been so generous in giving of his time and his intellect. And today, he's a published author, I highly recommend all of his books. The Bicycle Man gets to the type of testimony that I think we're going to hear from Bob today. But as a citizen of the world, but also devoted Christian, Bob's willing to come to us to talk about faith, witness, and democracy. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Carol, for that
nice to have you.
Beautiful introduction, and good morning, everybody, on this chilly October morning. I drove in with the top down today, and I haven't quite warmed up yet. So if you hear a little shaking in my voice, you know, I'm trembling and too close to call and way too close for comfort. Election, we know it's going to be trick or treat. We just don't know whether we're going to go home with a Mars bar in our bag or an M80 in our pumpkin. Will the country press forward on its long and imperfect quest to form a more perfect union, or will we retreat on the retreads of a failed and broken presidency that ended in chaos and violent insurrection? There's one thing this election season has already taught us, and that is that we are a deeply and bitterly divided country, and that as a functioning democracy, we have very nearly lost our way. What began as a small and subversive ripple has widened across the pond of American discourse.
Speak up.
The truth is, this election should not be a contest. The candidates aren't playing the same game. They're not playing by the same rules. If these were two high school football games, they would never kick off on the same field. And yet, with stakes as high as at any in our lifetime, it's going to come down to a coin toss. Win, lose, or draw, we're already in trouble. We got to do better than this. It's careless, it's frivolous, it's reckless. We are the stewards of a great democracy. It's our duty as citizens to strengthen that democracy, not to wantonly harm it or put it at risk. When we fail the country. And it's fair to ask whether we're failing now. And we're not here today to answer that question. We're here as Christian people in search of ways to strengthen our Christian witness and to bear that witness in our lives, in our work, and at the ballot box. And so today I'd like to suggest 3 things we can do in our own lives to become better stewards of our democracy, to set an example among our family, our coworkers, and friends. I think there's much good that could come if we work to, 1, nurture a spirit of national community, that binding strength that comes from the common purpose and vision we share. Toxic partisanship is tearing away and testing those bonds. We must learn to disagree better. The second is to nurture a spirit of radical compromise. Progress is a two-way street built on a good faith belief in each side's willingness to yield some ground. Trust breaks down, though, in the face of falsehood. We must restore a practice of faithful discernment to our political discourse. And the third is to nurture a spirit of honest inquiry, asking questions and listening to the answers to learn. We must ask ourselves better questions about our candidates. A spirit of national community, a spirit of radical compromise, a spirit of honest inquiry. That's what we want to talk about today. By nurturing these 3 great spirits of government by the consent of the governed, we can, I believe, take important steps toward healing our politics, strengthening the nation, and upholding our calling as stewards of a great democracy. Bill Clinton was, for my money, the best politician of his generation. He believed our critics are our friend because we learn from them. Now, Bill Clinton had a lot of critics. He'd be the first to tell you he had a lot to learn. But I don't recall a time when he tried to demonize or delegitimize his opponents. He certainly didn't talk about locking them up. He didn't call them enemies of the state. He didn't threaten to send our military after them. He didn't call them sandbox names or try to make it personal. In fact, if a member of Congress voted against him on Monday, he wanted to have him over for lunch on Tuesday because he would need his vote on something else on Wednesday. That's how we move forward in a functioning democracy. That's how we get things done. So we have to learn how to disagree better. And when we do, we'll be better for it. Now, some of us attended a session on this very subject here at Bradley Hills last spring, and I took a few ideas from that session that I think can help us all to disagree better. And it starts with a search for common ground. What values do we share in common? What interests do we share? What aspirations? What goals? 2 is to listen to each other in a respectful way and try to learn from those who disagree with us. 3 is to ask good faith, open-ended questions intended to deepen our understanding of each other's positions. Now, I've spent much of my career asking people questions and listening to the answers, and I've listened to a lot of other people ask questions during the course of that time, and I've learned that there are 3 reasons people ask questions. 1 is to get a discussion going. Doesn't really matter what the answer is. What's important is that we're engaging. 2 is to demonstrate that we know a lot about our subject. And 3 is to actually get information. There are 3 different things. It's important to ask questions because we want to engage people and learn from them. What are you unhappy about? What do you really want to be done about it? What would you most like to achieve? What in a perfect world might that look like? Lean into reflection. Don't jump into response. You know, sometimes you're talking with somebody and you haven't finished your sentence and they just can't wait to jump in. Sometimes we need to just take the time to process and reflect. Get specific about where we actually disagree and how much daylight there is between us. Sometimes we're surprised that it's not as much as we feared. Where do we differ on values and by how much? Where do our interests differ? How widely? Where do our goals diverge and how big a divergence is there really? And then work toward constructive compromise. Yield to each other in a way that feels equitable. Consolidate progress where we can. Identify outstanding areas of disagreement and then agree to work together going forward to try to narrow those differences, build on common ground, and advance mutual gains. Last spring, Denise gave a great sermon that I took away quite a bit about this. She was talking about tying together the church as what she called the provisional representation of humanity. Very powerful concept. She talked about the importance of being that in a faithful way. She talked about the way that falsehood can damage a relationship. We're going to talk in a minute about how it can damage a democracy. Talked about learning to meet others where they are, not bludgeoning them with knowledge or conviction, but approaching them with gentleness, humility, and love. Learning where we can, finding common ground where we must, even as we abide in the beliefs we hold dear. We have to learn to disagree better. This next part is important to me, nurturing the spirit of radical compromise and practicing discernment. Democracy isn't for people who agree. It's a way to survive our disagreements and be able to function, cooperate, and move forward together as a society. For nearly 2.5 centuries, we've mostly managed to do that. It hasn't been perfect, it hasn't always worked, and it has never worked really well for everybody. We've got a long way to go, but we've made enormous progress. It hasn't happened by trying to denigrate, demonize, dominate, and destroy those who disagree with us. Effective leaders speak and act in ways that build on common ground and nurture the spirit of compromise needed to forge agreements that help the nation to confront the challenges and seize the opportunities that reflect the broadest possible national interest. Falsehood and lies salt the fields of common ground and make compromise infinitely harder, if not impossible. Thou shalt not bear false witness to thy neighbor. I wrote that down some decades ago and pinned it up on the pod where I wrote my stories every day. I've kept it where I work for many decades. Why is that such a foundational commandment? Because lies are meant to confuse, distract, and deceive us, to cause us to question our own beliefs and understandings, to doubt the courage of our convictions, and to distrust the word of others. That does real damage to us as people, as citizens, and as a national community. I have a close family member we've known each other all our lives. I'll leave it at that. She loves me, and for most of our lives, she has treated me like a king. She's a Trumper. She is a highly educated, well-intentioned, devoutly Christian Trumper. And she doesn't believe a word I say. That's not an accident. It's by design. I've worked in this town for 30 years. I've covered the White House for 10. I trust what she's learned in her profession as an educator. She distrusts completely what I've learned in mine. And again, this is not an accident. Democracy requires of us as citizens one immutable duty: to hold our leaders to account for what they do and what they fail to do on our behalf. That means it's on us to support leaders when they work to advance the interests, values, and aspirations we share, to make them pay a price when they don't, and to know the difference between the two. When a leader normalizes mendacity and routs the very idea of truth as an agent of social conversation and political discourse, they degrade our ability to understand what's at stake, to support our leaders when they do the right thing, to make them pay a price when they don't, and to know the difference between the two. Little by little, every lie a leader tells chips away at our constitutional right to hold our leaders to account. And democracy without accountability is farce. It's easy to mess this up and very hard to get it right. That's why for most leaders, chronic mendacity is incapacitating. One candidate has made it part of his brand. In 4 years as president, he made 30,573 false or misleading statements, about 21 per day on average, and that's just what he said in public, including the false claim that he won the last election. In August, this candidate made 162 false and misleading claims in a single 64-minute press conference. In this candidate's world, wind turbines cause cancer, cats and dogs are on the menu for some people, electric boats are safer than sharks in the water, and federal aid workers are bulldozing towns through the mountains of North Carolina. Black people don't know who they are. To paraphrase Faulkner, they're not even black. This candidate is running for the highest office in the land on a campaign of concerted deceit designed to mislead the public and con the voters. He's waging an assault on truth itself, and an assault on the truth is an assault on our democracy. Those who care about government by the people have a civic duty to counter that assault with something this candidate abandoned long ago: the profound power of the simple truth. We should all take a moment to consider why. Lies can make it hard to discern the actual truth, and so we retreat to tribe. They can cloud our reasoning and distort our judgment. Lies can devalue the actual truth by creating false equivalencies between what people say. They feed cynicism, undercut resolve, and weaken our ability to hold our leaders to account. Lies corrode democracy like acid corrodes steel. We cannot bathe our democracy in lies and think that it won't take a toll. Now, we could design an entire series here on developing a practice of faithful and constructive discernment. Here, though, are 3 things we can all do to begin that practice. We can inform ourselves with trusted sources. Newspapers for many, many years have insisted on doing their best to get the story right, because if they don't, they can be sued for libel. And newspapers have assets. And when you sue a newspaper, for 20 or 30 or 40 or $50 million, you can expect to get the money if a jury rules in your favor. As someone who spent more than 30 years as a reporter, I can tell you that breathes down the back of your neck with every word you write. People who think that newspaper reporters are careless with the truth should reflect on that reality. Internet sites are a little bit different. Some have no assets. Many we don't even know who's writing them. Holding them to account is not part of the bargain. So we need to start being a little bit more discerning about where we're getting our notions of truth. And I would suggest that as we identify reliable sources, that we inform ourselves through those sources. Recognizing the lines between journalism and advocacy. As a reporter for more than 30 years, it was my job to try to lay out the facts as clearly as I could. One approach I took to covering a president was, when they make a statement or take an action, let's lead with the promise. What are they trying to do? What are they trying to fix? How are they trying to go about it? And then get down to raising questions and giving voice to people who say, well, here's the problem with that. It seemed to make sense. But as an advocate for environment, to protect the environment and public health, it is my responsibility to tell the truth, but it's also my responsibility to tell a persuasive narrative. It's a slightly different responsibility. We all need to recognize that. We need to recognize the difference between a column by George Will and a front page analysis by David Sanger. They're different products, they're different animals. We all need to keep that in mind. And there's a whole spectrum from straight news reporting to analysis to commentary to just rank opinion. This is just how I'm feeling. Big difference in the quality of the information you're getting. Finally, we should all become a falsehood vigilante. Now, that can make for some annoying dinner conversations, and we need to pick our battles. Not everything needs to be an argument. Why are we arguing in this country about electric cars? If you want an electric car, buy one. The government's paying you $7,500 and an extra $3,000 in Maryland. If you want to buy one, that's great. If you don't, nobody's making you. We don't need to be arguing about this as a country. But we need to become falsehood vigilantes, call people out, not perpetuate false rumors any more than we would perpetuate gossip. As a journalist, I will share with you that I developed what I consider to be a hierarchy of authority. The first one, is it possible? Is it possible? I guess it's possible that people are eating cats and dogs in Ohio, but is it plausible? Not really, and particularly when the officials in the town are telling us it's not happening. Is it credible? Is it credible? Okay, I guess it's possible. I guess it's plausible, but am I hearing this from a credible source? Is this coming from the, from the oil and gas industry, or is it coming from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration? Is it authoritative? Do I have a reason to believe this person knows what they're talking about? Is this a Nobel-winning economist? Or, is this somebody who's got an axe to grind? And finally, unassailable. That to me is the highest standard. This is unassailable. This is the gold standard. We're making a claim that you really can't rebut. So that hierarchy of authority is helpful to me in practicing discernment. As Christians, we must recognize that toxic mendacity is part of a larger strategy to widen division, to the point that the country struggles to exist in a state of perpetual opposition. so that we're unable to listen to each other, learn from each other, and create the common ground necessary to forge compromise. This is in many ways the most grave attack on our democracy, because as important as our laws and institutions are, what holds our democracy together, what makes it work, is our belief in the necessity, the provenance, and the virtue of compromise. Our willingness, eagerness even, to accept such gains as can be achieved in exchange for yielding some ground to others, in the knowledge that we'll all have the chance to come back again and try to do better next time. That belief, that faith, is what holds our democracy together, and we dare not squander it. Finally, nurturing a spirit of honest inquiry, asking better questions about ourselves, about the candidates. In 1961, John F. Kennedy, in his inaugural address, admonished the country to ask not what the country can do for you, ask what you can do for the country. In 1980, Ronald Reagan asked Jimmy Carter, actually, he looked at the camera and asked the American people during his debate with Jimmy Carter, "Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago?" Now, Reagan knew the answer. The country had gone through a deep recession. Interest rates were out of sight, 17, 18, 19% for a mortgage. And he knew what the answer was going to be. And the next week, he won in a landslide. Years later, decades on, every 4 years, presidential candidates trot out that old question: are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? It's the wrong question. It signals less about the quality of a presidency than about the shift in American culture since Kennedy asked his question and Reagan asked his. The "are you better off" question turns the idea that we're all in this together on its ear. It suggests that a president has far more impact than they actually do on kitchen table issues. And it crowds out deeper inquiry that goes more directly to the demands of the job. A couple of examples. Stock market's up 54% since Joe Biden took office. That's great for the 70 million Americans who have an individual retirement account, or the millions more who are living off of one. It is far better, though, for the richest 10% of the country that owns 87% of the stock than for the bottom half that owns none. Are you better off? Home prices. Home prices are up 22% since Biden took office. Now, that does make it harder for new home buyers to break into the market. It has also added $12 trillion in wealth to the 2/3 of Americans who own their own home. You better off or not? Life expectancy is up 1.1 years since Biden took office, 77.5 years, though it might not feel all that great to those of us who are 4 years closer to our maturity date. The point here is every 4 years, some of us feel better off and some of us don't. And a president has very little to do with it. Certainly the quality of our individual lives is tied to the nation's fortunes. I understand that. That's important. But a president's impact on that stems from how well they do at their job writ large to do three things: represent the American people, all of the American people, those who vote for them and those who don't, defend the Constitution, and advance the values, interests, and aspirations we share. As the political embodiment of the nation, presidents play an outside role in setting the tone for national polity. As in their role as chief magistrate, they must faithfully administer the laws of the land. As commander-in-chief, they must strengthen our alliances, work for peace and security, and confront the very real threats we face from nations and actors that mean us harm. Presidents succeed or stumble based on how well or how poorly they do at those tasks by, for instance, practicing integrity and modeling civility to set the national tone, enforcing the law, investing in the workforce, driving innovation, confronting mounting dangers like nuclear proliferation or climate change. Those actions will have far greater impact on our lives as individuals and as a nation than anything that might show up in a simple quadrennial better or worse calculus. Here then, flowing from the actual purpose of the presidency, are 5 questions we might ask ourselves of the 2 presidential candidates. Is a candidate laying out a unifying vision that can bring people of disparate views together, or stoking grievance and sowing division that make it hard to move ahead and get things done on behalf of the country? Is a candidate committed to the Constitution and the rule of law? Remember, job 1 for a president by oath is to protect and defend the Constitution. And the Constitution says the president must faithfully carry out the nation's laws. Legislation that Congress passes on everything from tax and budget issues to how we protect our food, our water, worker safety, and an array of other things. Does the candidate embody or threaten those values, interests, and aspirations we share as a nation? Does the candidate bring a deliberate approach to decision making? In times of hard choices, we rely on a president to listen to diverse views, to lend proportionate weight to competing stakes, and to strike the best possible balance between risks and potential loss and gain for the greatest good of the country. Mistakes result from decisions that are driven by anger, vengeance, hostility, and fear. Finally, does the candidate respect the will of the people? Bill Clinton used to say the American people almost always get it right. Winston Churchill said you can count on Americans to do the right thing after they've exhausted all other options. But the point is that democracy, as we've said, isn't for those of us who agree. It's a way to settle our disagreements. It's how we discern who we are, what's important to us. It's how we manifest the collective genius of the nation, if you will. It only works, though, when every vote is counted, every voice is heard, and we, the people, are free to know the truth about what our leaders do and fail to do on our behalf. Without that, how are we supposed to solve our problems? How are we even going to survive them? Democracy works best when we engage in a spirit of national community, recognizing that we're all in this together. When we engage in a spirit of radical compromise, willing to yield ground in order to make progress, and a spirit of honest inquiry, asking good faith questions because we want to learn. Together, we can learn to disagree better, to practice discernment, and to ask better questions, so that we might become, for ourselves and for each other, that next small ripple that widens across the great pond of American democracy. Happy to take your questions.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you for your patience. That was long. That was long. That was a lot.
We'll take some here in the room, and then we'll recognize and try to intersperse with people on chat. So I don't know, Jack, do you want to go
Well,
first?
what can we do to restore the faith in the electoral process? Because that not only leads to violence on January 6th, but it leads people not to get involved, not to vote. And I'm concerned about that loss of faith. Is there anything we could do about that?
So let me just put a question back to you. What do you think is causing that loss of faith?
Well, people are saying that it's not a fair election. The process is faulty, so you can't trust the results.
Okay. What I love about that answer is it goes back to what we talked about, toxic mendacity. As I think everyone in this room knows, after the last election, the loser filed more than 60 lawsuits in different jurisdictions before 60 different courts, and every single one threw them out, and they said there's nothing to it. In place after place, Georgia being the best example, where we heard so much about all the bad things that were being done in Georgia. People have won lawsuits for defamation against characters who falsely accused them of malfeasance in the management of those votes. The director of Homeland Security for the president who lost told us last year, this was the most secure election in the history of our country. So why is it that people are losing faith in that system? There's one reason, and it's because a person has continued to lie about it, told that lie over and over and over, and is telling it right now. And a certain number of people have come to believe it. So toxic, deliberate mendacity has undermined our faith in the legitimacy of our democracy. That is real damage. That is real damage. That's what we need to fight.
And then we're going between them.
Well, first I want to say that I think that what you've done is make a powerful statement about democracy and a powerful statement about the coming election without, by the way, naming any names, which was interesting. But however, I'm worried, and I'm going back to that relative of yours that you had since and you've known well and seem to respect. And this is where I have problems, not with what you said, but the fact that every one of us in this room believes what you said, but we're not getting to people like that relative of yours. And this is where I have a dilemma, because what we consider to be the truth and what we believe is factual, others don't see this, and as I say, some of them are even smart. Now, I have to say, I tend to categorize them all as idiots, but you know, that's probably not a fair assessment, because there are people, for whatever reason, they're believing wrong, the things that we would say are not factual. But that's the dilemma for me, is that we're speaking to each other as people who want factual, and we want democracy to work, and we believe in it. And we grew up with those of us who are old enough, grew up with leaders who actually demonstrated those values. But my dilemma is, how are we missing so many? And since we're talking also about Christianity today, so many of these people actually called themselves Christians. And that troubles me too, because so I guess I'm saying, how do we talk to the people who need to hear this message and have any effect, rather than talking to ourselves and reinforcing what I think all of us in this room believe to be true?
So it's a great question, and I'll start by saying again, what's making this hard is the damage that's been done by a deliberate strategy of deceit, and by a deliberate strategy of undermining the very currency of truth. So when Joe Biden was elected 4 years ago, I had a conversation with this individual who has a master's degree in education from the University of Virginia. And she started telling me what a corrupt person Joe Biden was.
Yeah.
And I said, look, I've been in this town more than 30 years. He's been in the Senate since he was 29 years old. There's never been a whiff of a scandal around that man in the time he's been in Washington. I covered him as a chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. I watched him very closely as vice president for 8 years. And I'm telling you, what you're saying is absolutely wrong. And I would love to hear your evidence. That was the end of the conversation. So the answer here is real damage has been done. We're paying a high price for years and years and years of lying at the top level. And I'm going to add to this something else. Propaganda works. Some of us who've been around, you worked in other countries, understand how propaganda can control the way people think and believe. Propaganda works. Capitalism works. Capitalism works really well. When you combine propaganda for profit, it is the most powerful engine of public persuasion in the history of the world. When CNN proved that there was a market for 24/7 news, there was only journalism integrity that prevented somebody from saying, I can identify a demographic and tell them over and over that what they fear is real, what they hate is horrible, and I can program them to never want to turn the TV off because I'm assuring them, here's the answer over here, and here's the villain over here. No such journalistic integrity constrained the people who created Fox News. Fox News is propaganda for profit, and anyone who doubted it has only to look at the words of the Fox News presenters, producers, and reporters themselves, as were revealed in the lawsuit that Fox settled for close to $900 million after the last election. We know who they are. We know what they are. They are a menace. They are doing horrible damage to this country. And that makes it very hard to have the kind of conversations you have, you ask about.
B. Fox has a question. I have a couple of comments on chat that we'll get to, but B,
Okay.
go ahead. There.
Follow up, your question, that are you still talking to your friend, your relatives, best person?
Am I still talking?
Yeah.
Yes, I love her dearly. I love her.
Smile.
No, I'm not talking to my relatives right now.
Yeah, no,
But
listen, B, I love the question. I
Yeah.
called her last week. As I said, I'm saying to myself, it's about to get real. I'm gonna call her, let her know, still love you, and you know.
Second question to follow up the same thing, because I have exactly a friend who is the Chinese from Taiwan, I'm from Taiwan. She raised two very smart kids, Harvard graduate and a lawyer and everything, but they all Trumpers. So in the beginning, she's saying the propaganda, she sent all the Trumps things. So we kind of fight it. You say yours, I say mine, and then we talk back. So finally, up to the point, everybody says, stop talking politics. Otherwise, we will lose our friendship because we grew up together. However, after I listened to you today, I think we still have a little hope, because one of the sons kind of like very close to me. If I have a permission, I'm going to follow. Can I forward the today's class, today's adult ed to the son now here in Japan? So
we have had a request online, well, two comments. That one, that we get a copy of what you delivered and that you try to get it published in the Atlantic or the Harper's, whatever, because as a coherent overall presentation, we need it, but you know, we know Fox News is not going to take it. Whatever we can do. And by the way, next week, we have Lee Rainey, a devoted Christian, who is one of the experts in the world on what's happening to us with artificial intelligence. He might be able to help us a little bit. I don't know. But anyway, but yeah, other questions.
Maybe 30 years of Christian, so I'm joking to them that the question, it has been fermented in no flavor, and they accept that job. That means that they are not really deeply understand what the Christian means.
Well, so let me just say, this
Yeah.
is why I was talking about we have to disagree better. And so look, we gotta preserve our mental health. We've got to preserve our friendships, and we got to preserve our families. We can't let, I was saying yesterday to a group, one of my coworkers said on Friday in a meeting, they were talking to a younger person. They mentioned Jimmy Carter, and the person said, "Who's that?" And I thought to myself, I can't wait for the day when I say to somebody the words Donald Trump, and they look at me and say, "Who's that?" What if we could get back to the world where you could date somebody for 6 months and never talk about who you voted for president? Wasn't that great? This doesn't have to be the centrality of our lives. It's not supposed to be that. It's supposed to be a way to resolve disagreements, seize opportunity, and confront problems. It's supposed to do those three things, and that's it. It's not supposed to take over every aspect of our lives, every conversation we have with our loved ones, every dinner table discussion that we have. It's not supposed to be that. And David Brooks has been on this for a couple of years, writing very well about this, basically saying that because of an erosion, if you will, in our community life, in our family life, and in our spiritual life, too many of us are looking to politics to try to fill the void. It's never going to do that. All it has resulted in is identity politics, where we take our identity from what political party we adhere to, like a team, like we put on a jersey. And you say, do you think it'd be a good idea if we provided assistance to people who build affordable homes so that people who are having trouble cracking the market will have more to choose from? And the first thing they're going to come back with is, well, who thinks it's a good idea? Yeah. We're losing our capacity to discern. And so as soon as you hear that it's one party, half the people are going to say it's a great idea, and half the people say it's horrible. It's going to destroy the country. They're an enemy of the state. We can't live like that. Yeah. So
Judy Ozone has
we got to
question.
keep the lines of communication open.
Yeah.
And people need to know that we're hearing them and we respect them and we're praying for them.
Judy's asking for your experience where the fact checkers were 10 years ago. She says it seems like the coherent pushback is only visible recently.
Okay, so first of all, demand creates, situations create demand. When you have a president of the United States, the leader of the free world, telling 30,000 lies publicly, and again, most of what a president does, we never see. Most of what a president says is not something that the public has access to. And having covered the White House for 10 years, you'd sit down in that briefing room and you might have been 40 feet away from the Oval Office, but it was a world away. And you would sometimes have things that would dawn on you and you'd realize, I have no idea what's going on in there, except what people are telling me. So yeah, there's a real need for fact checking, and it's greater than ever because we have one candidacy that has long ago abandoned any proximity or allegiance to truth. So yeah, we do need fact checkers now more than ever, but we've always needed them, and it's always been a good idea to have them. I think one thing that's changed is, the Washington Post with Glenn Kessler, who does a terrific job, ProPublica with their fact checking. There are a number of really good fact checkers out there. And I think what we try to do at NRDC is we try to be a trusted source of good, sound information in our subject area, the environment. And I think there are others that have to be that. But yeah, we have to hold these people we have to hold them to the fire.
Yeah. Ben, yeah.
One thing that troubles me is that the guardrails for all of this don't seem to be working. Almost $1 billion judgment against Fox doesn't seem to have shifted things. Lawyers getting disbarred, people pleading guilty to election fraud. And it concerns me that hasn't moved the polls, at least in an appreciable way. And I don't understand that.
it's unfathomable until you step back and say, you know, we have a crisis in democracy because we have a crisis of discernment. And so you and I look at that lawsuit and say, that's a verdict.
Yeah.
$900 million is, I'm guilty. That's, you know, that's not ambiguous. But a lot of people look at it and say, oh my, they were treated so unfairly. And this one candidate who's been treated so unfairly, the whole world has been against him. It's just makes you want to cry. I've never heard so much belly aching in my life and so much whining. But this individual has just been treated so unfairly, and a lot of people believe it. And a lot of people don't understand that when 92 indictments are handed down against an individual, they've been handed down by grand juries, by citizens who are chosen literally at random to come in and listen to what a prosecutor says and listen to the evidence and just simply say, there's enough evidence here to warrant a trial. That's what an indictment is. It's not somebody picking up the phone and saying, indict somebody. How many people in the country don't understand that? This gets back to discernment. It gets back to our responsibility to be informed citizens and to play our role as stewards of a great democracy. Thank you.
Yeah, Steve.
What is it in the background of your relative and 40-something% of Americans that makes them so willing to accept unfact-checked, rumor mill, patently false information that might fit into their own grievance system or their feeling of having lost their position in society?
What a great question. I don't know. I don't know.
It seems to me that that's what we have to be going after, is to reassure that portion of the American public that you're not forgotten, that there is something in democracy in this country that will address what bothers you. My own case, my son lives in New York City. He has showed me a list of very credible news sources. He's reading the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Post, Politico, everything. And he still wants to vote for Trump simply because New York City has hotels full of immigrants who are pushed onto the street every 2 days so that they can clean the hotel. That's part of the contract.
Mhm.
And it makes the sidewalks impassable. And he thinks that Trump is going to solve that.
I told him, don't stay in my house.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, you put your finger on the real, you know, the real nub of it. How come somewhere north of 40% of the country is okay with this? And I think you start by there are different reasons for different people, but there is some galvanizing instinct here around a willingness to entrust a single individual rather than a system that's worked better than any other in the world. And so I don't know how you get to it.
But that system isn't working for
And
people in rural America.
that's right. And
Broad brush.
And there is, look, this administration should have done a better job on the issue that you raised. There's no question about that. It's also true that they worked very hard in good faith with some of the most conservative people in Congress to come up with a plan that would address it.
Yeah.
And it was spiked by one individual who wanted a political talking point instead of a solution. And so this party before country is real. The damage is real. And again, going back to, you know, people who have been convinced by the demagoguery. We're going to demagogue this issue to death and ride it all the way to November 5th.
But it's not just immigration. It's
Yeah.
the people in the cities are doing so much better than I am.
Right.
My roads are not getting fixed.
Yeah.
And it's Joe Biden's fault that my roads aren't getting fixed.
Yeah. Although actually the roads now are getting fixed and it's Joe Biden who's fixing them
Yeah.
because of the,
Not the county roads in the rural areas.
but
Everything devolves to the president.
Well, it's $1 trillion in infrastructure investment.
Actually, they are.
And so,
Michael Gibson has a question.
Yeah, I'm just a quick comment. I loved your presentation, Bob. It was wonderful. I this whole issue of why is this happening and why won't people listen to the truth has some another component to it besides Fox News, which I can't stand. But it goes back to Sinclair Lewis wrote a book in the 1930s called "It Can't Happen Here." And it's a tale about how easy it would have been for Huey Lewis, sorry,
Long.
Huey Long, to have,
Rolling some
for
of the
Huey
news.
Long to have been, or someone like Huey Long to have been elected president. And we saw it with, of course, the horrible House Un-American Activities during the 50s. So it's not just Fox News. I just want to, there's some component in American society that seems to be amenable to this, irrespective of that. And I just wanted to emphasize just how incredibly complicated it is, so that when we talk about these issues of how do you talk to your friend who's a Trumper, it's not just Fox News.
Yeah, that's a great point. And again, that's why I do think it's so important, Mike, that we keep lines of communication open. Our diplomats among us will tell you it's more important to keep the lines of communication open with your enemies than with your friends. We have to be able to talk to people. They have to feel like we're respecting them, we're listening to them. And, I guess a final note on this is, there are three things where I was raised in Richmond, you didn't talk about the dinner table: politics, money, and religion. Well, one thing is, we've got politics and religion all wound up around the same axle now. And so, it's hard to talk about one without the other, but just as we need to respect the beliefs of other people, if we expect them to be open and with us and in the interest of honest inquiry, we need to respect their positions at least enough to keep those lines of communication open. Mike, thank you.
Yeah, Bob, we can't thank you enough. Pat, did you have one last comment?
Yeah, better not, because I'm gonna have to read the scripture and I have to get it.
Okay, Bob, thank you for continuing to give your time, a lot of time, to this presentation. You put together so many important points that we all need and can use, and the recording will be available, and we'll check on getting the notes available to folks. And I do want to encourage you to continue to join us. This is a hard time. We do have a community here. We do need to learn from each other how to communicate. And we're working on it. We are working on it. Lee Rainey, who is a wonderful presenter, will be in person here next week, talking to us about what is the role of humanity, of humans, as we look at a future full of artificial intelligence. And I do think we've got to go ahead and work on it. I have a good Haitian friend whom I saw yesterday, and I hadn't seen her since all of this came up. And I said, how is your community responding to what's been out there? And she went, they're not surprised. They're used to this kind of degradation. So it's but there is hope. There is hope. We're here. We want to keep our communications open and with some skill, and you certainly have shown us that today, Bob. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you for having me. Thank you all.
I wish we had more Bob Deans. You were,
No, we all have our skills. They come out. But Bob, you're very generous, and we really appreciate it.
Thanks. Sorry I had to read it.
No.